7 minutes ago, Prince William ended years of private tension with one statement that left the royal household stunned. Speaking behind closed doors before a small circle of senior advisors, the future king declared that Queen Camilla would not be permitted to attend his coronation. No hesitation, no softened language. As the room fell silent, one question became impossible to ignore. What had happened between them to make William choose such a final and humiliating decision? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William had summoned the confidential meeting at Kensington Palace with only 3 people present: his closest constitutional advisor, a senior coronation planner, and one trusted member of his private office. Staff removed every phone, secured the doors, and cleared the corridor because the discussion concerned the future direction of the crown. A coronation is the sacred ceremony in which a new monarch is formally crowned and publicly accepts the duties of the throne, making it far more than a family celebration. Every person allowed inside carries symbolic meaning. Every empty seat sends a message. William understood that excluding his father's wife would draw a clear line between his future reign and the household Charles had built. Still, the prince did not hesitate. His hand tightened around a sealed folder as he declared that Camilla would receive no invitation, no ceremonial role, no private seat, no balcony appearance, and no access to Westminster Abbey. The Abbey, the historic church where British monarchs are crowned, would become the setting of her most public absence. William ordered that the restriction be placed inside the official planning framework, meaning the written structure controlling invitations, security, seating, transport, and ceremonial duties. Before entering the room, Catherine had watched him pause outside the door. She quietly asked whether he was certain. He answered that he had never been more certain of anything. Hours later, Camilla received the decision through a private message delivered to Clarence House. She read the first page while standing beside her desk. But the anger on her face slowly gave way to disbelief. The Queen Consort lowered herself into a chair when she realized the instruction had come directly from William. Charles had not attended the meeting, leaving everyone uncertain whether his son had acted against him or with his quiet approval. A second sealed document had already been prepared for the king. Yet nobody in the room knew what it contained. The folder revealed something even more unsettling. William's directive included completed seating plans, security restrictions, ceremonial instructions, and pages of prepared protocol. This had not been an emotional decision made that morning. He had been assembling the case for weeks. Then one advisor noticed a handwritten date beside Camilla's name, marking a private royal ceremony where she had crossed a line the future king had never forgiven. To understand why William was willing to divide the royal household so publicly, the people trapped inside this conflict and everything each of them stood to lose must first be understood. Behind the grandeur of crowns and titles stood 3 people carrying very different scars. William saw himself as the guardian of his mother's memory and the future of the crown. Camilla believed she had spent decades earning her place beside Charles. And the king, weakened by the struggle between duty and family, now faced the harshest possibility of his reign. His son and his wife could no longer remain beneath the same royal roof. William was preparing to inherit more than a throne. He wanted to rebuild the monarchy around discipline, responsibility, and public trust. And he believed every person beside him at the coronation had to represent the reign he intended to create. The crown, meaning the institution and authority of the monarchy rather than only the physical object, could not enter a new era while carrying private divisions into its most important ceremony. For the prince, allowing Camilla to attend would mean beginning his rule with a public image of unity that did not exist behind palace walls. Yet for the Queen Consort, exclusion would feel far more painful than losing a seat. She had endured years of criticism, comparisons with Diana, and doubt about whether the public would ever accept her. She believed her place beside Charles had been earned through loyalty and sacrifice. So being shut out of William's coronation would seem like the final rejection of everything she had fought to become. At Adelaide Cottage, William stood near a window while Catherine watched him in silence. He admitted that the decision would wound his father deeply, but he said pretending trust remained would damage his own reign from its very first day. Catherine sensed the strain beneath his calm. She supported her husband's right to shape the future. Yet she feared this choice could divide the family beyond repair. She urged him not to let old pain make the decision for him. William turned toward her and insisted that this was no longer only about Diana. Camilla, he believed, had tried to influence the ceremonial roles of Catherine, George, Charlotte, and Louis, pulling the conflict out of the past and placing it directly into the lives of his children. At Clarence House, Camilla pushed the message aside in frustration and demanded to know who had approved its wording. When an aide confirmed that it had come from William's office, her voice fell silent. She understood that this was not a warning designed to intimidate her. It was final. Charles received his own copy while alone in his study. He read the instruction twice, placed it face down, and remained silent as an aide waited. The king finally dismissed everyone without revealing whether he would challenge his son. But his silence carried its own message. One moment months earlier had convinced William that Camilla no longer respected the boundaries of his household. The exclusion announced today had not begun with a coronation plan. It had begun in a nearly empty chapel when one unexpected instruction changed how William viewed Camilla forever. The true beginning of William's decision came during a private ceremony rehearsal that was never meant to become significant. There were no cameras, cheering crowds, or public speeches, only a small group of royals standing inside St. George's Chapel. Yet within minutes, a disagreement over one ceremonial position exposed a struggle far greater than seating or protocol. William would later look back on that afternoon as the moment Camilla stopped being merely difficult and became a threat to his future reign. The family had gathered for a closed rehearsal linked to a national service where entrances, seating order, procession timing, and the positions of senior royals were being finalized before the public event. St. George's Chapel, a historic royal church used for major family ceremonies, carried enormous symbolic importance, which meant even a small adjustment could send a powerful message. William expected Catherine and their children to follow the arrangement approved by his private office. George would remain close to his father, while Charlotte and Louis would stay beside their mother, reflecting their place in the direct line of succession, the family members closest to inheriting the throne. Then Camilla changed everything. She instructed a ceremonial official to move Catherine and Charlotte farther behind her own relatives, describing it as a matter of seniority, even though the approved order placed the Wales family ahead. William entered as the chairs were being rearranged and saw an attendant lift Charlotte's place card from the front arrangement. He watched it being carried toward a rear row. Without raising his voice, the prince crossed the chapel, took the card, and returned it to its original place. Camilla confronted him near the choir stalls and said that while Charles remained king, his household would control ceremonial precedence, meaning the official ranking that decides who stands or walks before whom. William answered that his wife and daughter would not be pushed aside to satisfy anyone's personal sense of authority. Charlotte stood close to Catherine, quiet but clearly aware of the tension. Her mother placed a protective hand on her shoulder, while William struggled to control his anger. Seeing his daughter forced to witness the dispute made the moment impossible for him to dismiss. After the rehearsal, he discovered the change had not been spontaneous. A revised order had already been sent to 2 ceremonial staff members working under Camilla's authority, proving she expected the new arrangement to become permanent. Charles later asked his son to let the matter pass for the sake of peace. William agreed in public, but privately instructed his office to document every attempt by the Queen Consort's household to interfere with Catherine or the children. That record became the sealed folder used in his final decision. When Camilla learned what he had done, she demanded a private meeting. Neither entered it willing to compromise. The chapel had exposed the struggle, but the confrontation that followed would remove every remaining layer of courtesy between the future king and the woman he now believed had crossed the line. There were no advisors in the room when William and Camilla finally confronted one another, no private secretaries to soften the conversation, no ceremonial officials to interrupt, and no king standing between them. The door closed behind William, and decades of buried resentment entered with him. Camilla expected to defend her authority. Instead, she faced a future monarch who had already decided that her influence over his wife, his children, and his reign would come to an end. The meeting took place in a private sitting room at Clarence House only days after the chapel rehearsal. She had requested the conversation because William's written complaint had embarrassed Charles's household and turned a ceremonial disagreement into an official record. Camilla slid the rehearsal report across the table and accused him of turning a minor disagreement into a deliberate attack. William did not sit. He gripped the back of a chair and asked one question. Had she ordered Charlotte's position to be changed? The Queen Consort answered that royal hierarchy required difficult choices and that Catherine could not expect every ceremony to revolve around the Wales family. Royal hierarchy means the formal order that determines which family members receive the highest place during official duties. William replied that this was never about attention. It was about using palace authority to push his wife and daughter aside. His voice remained controlled until Camilla referred to Charlotte as one of several grandchildren. The prince pulled the chair away from the table, its legs scraping across the floor, and warned her never to speak about his daughter as though her place were disposable. Camilla's frustration hardened into wounded defiance. She said she had survived decades of public hatred to support Charles and would not be treated like a temporary figure waiting for William to erase her. Then she said what neither of them had dared say openly before. He was still judging her through the memory of Diana. William admitted that his mother's suffering would always matter, but he said the coronation decision was about Camilla's recent actions. He listed attempts to alter Catherine's duties, restrict George's ceremonial access, move Charlotte's position, and send instructions without his approval. When she asked whether Charles knew he was gathering evidence, William paused and replied only that his father knew enough. The answer left her uncertain whether the king had quietly accepted his son's case. Camilla finally demanded to know whether William truly intended to exclude her when he became monarch. He looked directly at her and said, "You will not stand beside me while I take the oath." The oath is the solemn promise a new sovereign makes to serve the nation and uphold the law. William opened the door and walked away, leaving her alone. The confrontation revealed his intention, but the next battle would be fought through documents, officers, and authority, where emotion alone could not remove a queen from a coronation. A royal exclusion is never achieved by simply refusing to send an invitation. Every seat, procession, entrance, security route, ceremonial title, and public appearance is protected by layers of planning. William understood that if his decision remained only a private warning, it could be reversed. So, while the family argued behind closed doors, the future king moved quietly through the machinery of the monarchy, ensuring Camilla's absence would become more than his intention, it would become the official plan. His authority came from his place as the future sovereign and from the power each monarch holds over the character of a coronation. A sovereign is the ruling king or queen, while the ceremonial framework is the official structure that decides who attends, where they sit, how they enter, and what role they perform. William's private office began shaping a smaller, more disciplined service built around the direct line of succession. Catherine, George, Charlotte, and Louis received clearly defined roles, while extended relatives and members of the previous royal household were moved to the sidelines. That structure gave him a procedural reason to exclude Camilla without turning every page into a personal accusation. Still, the emotional cost remained impossible to ignore. William met privately with a veteran constitutional advisor who had served the family for decades. The advisor removed his glasses, read the proposed exclusion twice, and warned that the decision would be seen as a judgment on Charles's entire reign. William answered that refusing to act would compromise his own before it had even begun. When the advisor asked how the king would feel seeing his wife denied entry, the prince looked down at the papers and admitted that hurting his father was the only part that made him hesitate. Then he gave the instruction. Camilla's household would receive no schedules, rehearsal notices, security credentials, transport details, or ceremonial briefings unless William personally reversed the order. Security credentials are the official passes that control who may enter protected royal spaces, making their removal a practical barrier, not merely a symbolic one. A senior palace official quietly backed the move and produced a provisional request from Camilla's office seeking a prominent role at the coronation. The document described her as the senior surviving queen, wording William believed had been designed to secure her inclusion before he could object. Catherine had not demanded the removal. In a private conversation, she told her husband that the decision had to belong to him because he alone would bear its consequences. Her restraint strengthened his resolve. William picked up a fountain pen once used by Charles, signed the revised instruction, stared at his name for a moment, then placed the pen down and ordered that the king receive a copy before sunset. William had secured the authority to enforce his decision, but its true cost became visible only when Charles read the order and chose what he would, and would not, do next. By sunset, the decision was no longer confined to William's office. The sealed document had reached the king. Camilla's household had been removed from planning discussions, and loyal staff members began receiving fresh instructions. Yet the most painful blow came not from William's words, but from Charles's reaction. Camilla had expected her husband to stop the exclusion immediately. Instead, the king read the order, closed the folder, and allowed the machinery around his wife to begin shutting down. Clarence House received formal notice that her representatives were no longer included in future coronation discussions. Calendar access disappeared. Planned briefings were cancelled, and 2 ceremonial officials were reassigned to William's team. The Lord Chamberlain's office, The royal department responsible for managing major ceremonies and official household arrangements was instructed to follow the revised structure without delay. The change spread quietly through the building, but nobody misunderstood its meaning. Staff who had once treated Camilla's place as guaranteed now avoided making promises, knowing the prince's signed instruction carried the authority of the future sovereign. Camilla entered Charles's study holding the notice in one hand and placed it directly in front of him. She waited for reassurance. He remained seated, exhausted by the choice before him, and said only that William had made his position unmistakably clear. The Queen Consort asked whether her husband intended to defend her. When Charles did not answer immediately, she removed the diamond brooch pinned to her dress, placed it on his desk, and said that silence was also a decision. Then she walked out before the monarch could respond. Charles stared at the brooch after the door closed. He wanted to protect the woman who had stood beside him through scandal, criticism, and years of public pressure. Yet he also feared losing the son who would inherit the crown. Forcing William to reverse the decision could trigger a constitutional conflict, meaning a serious dispute over the limits of royal authority, and might push the future king even farther away. Camilla saw no such complexity. To her, the exclusion was harsh, but Charles's refusal to fight felt like betrayal from the man for whom she had sacrificed the most. Several members of her household considered challenging the wording through official channels. Before they could act, the king sent a private written instruction forbidding any staff-led attempt to overturn William's plan. He had not formally endorsed the exclusion, but he had chosen not to interfere with his son's future coronation. That restraint allowed the decision to remain in place. Later that night, Charles requested a private meeting with William without Camilla, Catherine, or advisors present. The palace fallout had left Camilla isolated, but the true turning point would come behind another closed door where Charles finally asked William whether reconciliation was still possible. When Charles and William met that night, neither carried the confidence expected of a king. There were no aides, no briefing folders, and no carefully arranged chairs. Charles stood beside the fireplace while his son remained near the doorway, both aware that the conversation could determine more than Camilla's place at a ceremony. It could decide whether their own relationship survived the transition from one reign to the next. The king had summoned William to a private room at Windsor Castle and instructed the staff not to enter. The meeting was left out of the formal diary, the official record used to track royal engagements and business, because this was not meant to be a negotiation between sovereign and heir. It was a conversation between a father and son who had avoided the truth for too long. Charles poured 2 glasses of water, but neither man touched them. He asked whether excluding Camilla was truly necessary, or whether William was punishing her for wounds the family had never properly faced. The prince admitted that Diana's suffering would always shape him, but he refused to let his father reduce the decision to childhood resentment. He explained that Camilla's attempts to influence Catherine's duties and the children's ceremonial positions had changed everything. Unless a firm boundary was placed around his household, she would continue testing how far her influence could reach. Charles looked older as he listened. He admitted that he had spent years avoiding confrontation because he feared losing either his wife or his sons. That silence, he confessed, had allowed every disagreement to harden until compromise felt impossible. William's anger softened, but his decision remained unchanged. He told the monarch that he had no desire to erase Camilla from history or strip away every dignity she had earned beside him. She would retain the respect owed to the wife of a former sovereign, meaning the spouse of a king whose reign had ended, but she would not enter the sacred moment that defined William's own rule. Charles then asked whether Catherine had encouraged the ban. His son defended her immediately, saying she had urged caution and had never demanded revenge. That answer forced the king to accept that the decision belonged entirely to William. At last, Charles said he would not oppose the coronation arrangements. He asked only that Camilla be informed privately and spared unnecessary public humiliation. William agreed. Before he left, the king placed one hand on his shoulder. It was not approval, but it was acceptance. The prince covered his father's hand with his own and promised that the decision would never become a public spectacle. Father and son had reached a painful understanding in private. But once the decision reached the public, Britain would give William's choice a meaning neither man could fully control. By morning, the secret was no longer protected by palace walls. Phones lit up across London. Broadcasters abandoned their planned schedules, and newspaper presses rushed out special editions. William's private boundary had become a public earthquake. Supporters described it as a courageous break from the past. Critics called it an act of vengeance. But one image outside Buckingham Palace captured the deeper mood: a divided crowd staring at the gates, waiting for the monarchy to explain itself. A national broadcaster broke the story during its early morning program, describing the decision as William's decisive break with the previous royal household. The presenter emphasized that Camilla would have no ceremonial role and would not attend Westminster Abbey, the historic church where British monarchs are crowned. Within minutes, a major newspaper appeared with a striking front page showing William walking ahead alone. Beneath the headline read, "His crown, his rules." Beside it sat a smaller image of the Queen Consort leaving a church service, transforming one private decision into a public symbol of separation. Crowds gathered near Buckingham Palace and outside Clarence House. Some people carried photographs of Diana, while others argued that excluding an elderly royal woman from a family ceremony was unnecessarily harsh. The debate exposed something deeper than sympathy or anger. Britain was still judging the present through wounds that had never fully healed. Camilla watched the broadcast from a sitting room with only one aide beside her. When the presenter repeated that she had been excluded, she reached for the remote, switched off the television, and quietly said that the word made her sound like a criminal. Her pain was no longer hidden behind palace walls. It had become a national spectacle. William was unsettled by how quickly the story had turned humiliating. He instructed his communications team to release no personal accusations and to avoid any wording that sounded triumphant. Catherine read the newspaper coverage beside him and warned that public approval could become dangerous if it encouraged people to treat family suffering as entertainment. She reminded her husband that strength would now be measured by restraint, not by how loudly the crowd supported him. Charles then approved a brief palace statement confirming that the future sovereign would control his own coronation arrangements. A sovereign is the ruling king or queen, and the wording made clear that William's authority over the ceremony would not be challenged. The statement neither defended nor criticized Camilla, but the king's acceptance was unmistakable. William then authorized a private letter acknowledging her years of service to Charles, while confirming that the decision would remain unchanged. It was respectful but final. The country had delivered its judgment loudly, but the true meaning of William's decision would be settled quietly. When Camilla read his letter and chose how she would leave the stage, everything changed. Camilla sat at her writing desk and read the letter twice. On the second reading, she underlined the sentence confirming that the coronation would center only on the incoming sovereign, his consort, and the direct heirs. A consort is the spouse of a reigning king or queen, while direct heirs are the closest family members in line to inherit the throne. Her anger gradually gave way to sadness. She understood that no demand, appeal, or intervention from Charles could restore her place. The institution she had fought so hard to enter was preparing to move forward without her at its most symbolic moment. Camilla then wrote a brief reply stating that she accepted William's authority over his coronation and would not challenge the arrangements publicly. She did not apologize for the chapel incident, but she agreed that her household would end every attempt to influence the ceremony. Charles received a copy and visited her privately. The king admitted that his years of avoiding confrontation had helped create the final divide. She did not forgive him immediately, but she allowed him to sit beside her, showing that their marriage would survive even as her royal influence diminished. William felt no satisfaction when the reply arrived. The prince understood that protecting his future reign had required hurting his father and ending any remaining trust with Camilla. Still, he believed uncertainty would have caused greater damage than establishing a clear boundary. Catherine reminded her husband that the coronation could not be remembered as the day Camilla was rejected. It had to become the day a new family embraced the burden of service. Her words shifted the meaning of the decision from punishment toward purpose. Camilla retained her dignity, residence, title, and place beside Charles during his lifetime, but her authority over the Wales household came to an end. William's coronation planning became fully independent, with Catherine and their children at its center. The exclusion was not simply revenge for Diana or a dispute over protocol. It was William's declaration that his reign would not inherit every rivalry and every silence from the past. Charles accepted that he could not control his son's future. Camilla accepted that sacrifice did not guarantee lasting influence. William accepted that leadership sometimes demanded pain without triumph. And so the matter ended with no celebration and no reversal. Camilla stepped back. Charles let go. William moved toward the crown, having made the first irreversible decision of his reign. The royal household slowly adjusted to a future that could no longer be changed. Behind the palace walls, the conversations became quieter, but the consequences of William's choice remained impossible to ignore. Every member of the family understood that a new chapter had begun, one defined not by compromise, but by firm boundaries. For William, the decision was never about personal revenge. It was about shaping the monarchy he believed Britain deserved. For Charles, it meant accepting that his son would lead in his own way, even when that path caused deep personal pain. And for Camilla, it marked the moment she realized that influence earned over decades could still come to an unexpected end. History would remember the controversy, but it would also remember the message behind it. William chose certainty over hesitation, duty over comfort, and the future over the unresolved conflicts of the past. Whether people agreed with his decision or not, one reality remained unchanged. The future king had made his choice, and nothing that followed would ever undo it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.